This is a video on the sixth chapter of Bhagavad-Gita. Toward the end of the fifth chapter, Krishna began discussing the mystical yoga path, sometimes called Ashtanga Yoga. He stated that a yogi stops all external interactions and focuses his concentration in between the eyebrows, and thus he becomes free of all desire, fear, and anger. Then Krishna said that he is the enjoyer of all yoga and sacrifices. Bhoktaram yajna tapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram suhridam sarvabhutanam gyatva mam shantim richati. It means a person in full consciousness of me, namely Krishna, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the supreme lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. So at the end of the fifth chapter, Krishna said that he is the ultimate bhokta or enjoyer of all sacrifices and austerities. So he is the enjoyer of yoga as well. The sixth chapter continues with this discussion. In this chapter, Krishna describes how the yogi has to go to a secluded place and learn to sit with a straight head, neck, and body and concentrate his awareness on the tip of his nose. He must develop control of his mind and renounce all his desires and then meditate upon Krishna in the heart. But after Krishna finished describing this process, Arjun says that this is not for me. These austerities are very difficult because the mind is restless, and controlling the disturbed mind is harder than controlling the wind. To this objection, Krishna accepts Arjun's point about a restless mind, but counters by saying that even as it is hard, it is possible by practice and detachment. Of course, Arjun is not convinced. Instead of asking Krishna how to do this type of yoga involving mind control, Arjun starts asking about a failed yogi. He inquires, what happens if one is not able to complete yoga or fails in the path? And Krishna answers that such a yogi goes to heavenly planets and enjoys for a long time. Then after that he is reborn in a good family or among the yogis, and his prior state of realization is again revived. As he starts his journey in yoga yet again, after many lifetimes of practice, one attains perfection in yoga. After saying this, Krishna concludes exactly what he had concluded in the fifth chapter. He says, Yoginam api sarvesham madgaten antaratmanaha shraddhavan bhajate yomam same yukta tamo mataha. It means, of all the yogis, the one with great trust, who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me, is the most intimately united with me in yoga, and is the highest of all. That is my opinion. So both the fifth and the sixth chapters end by Krishna saying that he is the only object of meditation in yoga. There is simply no discussion of various postures. There is only one posture, namely sitting with a straight backbone in one place. In the fifth chapter, Krishna says that the yogi concentrates in between the eyebrows, and in the sixth chapter, on the tip of his nose, and by this he gains control over his mind. Then, after he develops complete focus on the nature of the Supreme Lord, he goes to the Lord's abode. Now we have to remember that Arjun found this path very hard, so it is very hard for almost everyone. We should not read this chapter as something that Krishna is asking Arjun to do, but for three other reasons. First, we can read this chapter as the requirements of the meditative path and why the things being done in the name of yoga at present have no connection to it. Second, We can read this chapter for the symptoms of the advanced transcendentalists and understand that they are desired for any kind of path, not just the meditative path. Third, we must know that even the meditative path is about meditation on Krishna, not on anything else. Many impersonalists at present claim that yoga is about self realization, obtained by focusing on the self. That idea is contradicted toward the end of this chapter. As we have discussed in earlier chapters, whatever people call yoga at present is actually tantra, which means how to free the body of diseases. It is not a bad activity and it is not a spiritual activity. Real yoga begins when one can fully control their mind, which is extremely hard, as attested by Arjun. And yet, Krishna says it is possible to attain the results after many lifetimes of attempts to control the mind. Yoga is perfected only when one can focus their minds on Krishna in the heart. None of these facts discussed in the sixth chapter of Bhagavad Gita are ever discussed in any yoga school at present. Many people know about the historical debate between Shankaracharya and Mandan Mishra and his wife Ubhaya Bharati, which is also described as the debate between Vedanta and Mimamsa. In this debate, Shankaracharya defeated Mandan Mishra and his wife Ubhaya Bharati, and then Mandan and Ubhaya renounced Mimamsa and accepted Vedanta. They also left Grihastha ashram and became sannyasis. For many centuries after that, it was widely assumed that Vedanta is the eternal truth, while Mimamsa and other Vedic schools such as Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, etc., were at best temporary and mundane schools, and studying them was essentially extending the cycle of birth and death. This conclusion has had disastrous effects in the centuries that followed. The reason for this disaster is that the Vedanta Mimamsa debate pits the Brahman of Vedanta against the Dharma of Mimamsa, when no such conflict is supported in any Vedic text. Vedanta Sutra begins with the aphorism Athato Brahma Jigyasa, which means, now, therefore, let us inquire into Brahman. Similarly, Mimamsa begins with the aphorism Athato Dharma Jigyasa, which means, now, therefore, let us inquire into Dharma. So, when Shankaracharya debated Mandan Mishra, the implication was that there is a conflict between Brahma and Dharma. When Shankaracharya defeated Mandan Mishra, the implication was that Brahma supersedes Dharma. Both of these are false conclusions. First, there is no conflict between Brahma and Dharma. Second, Brahma does not supersede Dharma. Rather, the soul is Brahma and it is subordinate to Dharma. And yet, the net result of this debate was that people gave up Dharma. Shankaracharya also composed a song called Nirvan Shatakam with 6 stanzas. Each stanza ends with the line Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham, which means I am the form of Chit and Anand, and I am Shiva, I am Shiva. Every soul is a form of Chit and Anand, so there is no question of Brahma being formless. And even Shankaracharya talked about Rupa or form. That also means that this statement applies only to Lord Shiva and no one else. Factually, Shankaracharya was an incarnation of Lord Shiva, so Shivoham Shivoham was true for him, not for everyone. Still, Shankaracharya's followers disregarded Chidananda Rupaha and sang Shivoham Shivoham to claim they were Shiva. This led to a split between Shaivas, Shaktas, and Vaishnavas because Shakti was called Maya or illusion by the Advaitins, and Vishnu forms were called Brahma covered by Maya, so both were rejected. Meanwhile, each Jiva began calling itself Shiva. The Shaivism was accepted not in the sense that there is an eternally distinct personality called Lord Shiva, but in the sense that each person was themselves Shiva, while both Shakti and Vishnu were illusions. Using this philosophy, Shankaracharya defeated the Buddhists who had rejected the Mimamsakas and thus the Vedic tradition as a whole. Buddhists advocated Anatmavad, which means no self, and Shankaracharya advocated Brahmavad, which seemed to equate each person to Shiva. And so people went from saying that I don't exist to saying that I am supreme. This strategy always works. For example, if someone is self-destructive, then we can tell them, you can be everything you want to be. And most people will fall for it most of the time, even though it is not true. And so, any ideology that replaces self-nihilism with self-supremacy always wins. And this is how Advaita won over Buddhism. However, self-supremacy is as much a delusion as self-nihilism. In fact, since the soul is very small, self-nihilism is closer to the truth than self-supremacy. Self-nihilism makes a person humble and tolerant, but self-supremacy makes him arrogant and supremacist. These two are the extremes of all versus nothing. Buddhist Anatmavad claims that I am nothing, and Shankaracharya's Brahmavad claims that I am everything, when the reality is that we are something rather than nothing or everything. Since we are neither nothing nor everything, therefore, Shankaracharya's Brahmavad took people from the illusion of being nothing to the illusion of being everything. The net result of both Buddhism and Advaita was the rejection of dharma as the cause of material bondage. One such dharma is the householders providing for the Buddhist and Advaita monks. If worldly dharma is the cause of bondage, nobody should maintain the Buddhist or Advaita monks. Then what are they going to eat? Likewise, it is a Kshatriya's duty to protect the citizens from thieves and invaders. If these duties cause bondage, who is going to protect society? It is parental duty to care for children and children's duty to care for the elderly. But if these duties cause bondage, then who is going to care for children and parents? Thus, when Advaita and Buddhism rejected Mimamsa, they also undermined Dharma and became self-negating. I often say that every lie is a self-contradiction. Meanwhile, the truth is consistent and complete. Thus, when Brahma was pitted against Dharma, society decayed due to Adharma, not elevated to Brahma. This background is essential to understand this verse. Anashrita karma phalam karyam karma karoti yaha sah sannyasi cha yogi cha. It means one who works without being attached to the results of actions is a sannyasi and yogi. Then, na niragnir na chakriyaha, which means one who lights no fire and does no work is not a yogi or sannyasi. So both positive and negative statements are made. The positive statement is that a yogi and sannyasi is one who renounces results of actions rather than actions. The negative statement is that one who renounces action is not a sannyasi or yogi. The specific mention of fire in this verse is a reference to Vedic rituals, earlier being done by the Mimamsakas. Those who renounce all rituals are not sannyasis or yogis. Rather, these rituals must be performed without desiring results. The flaw with the Brahmanas prior to the advent of Buddhism was that they were doing rituals for material profit. And this desire for profit had divorced them from the path of yoga and sannyasa. Buddhism and Advaita did not bring detachment to Brahmanas. They became opponents of rituals and thus of real yogis and sannyasis who lit fire. At the end of the last chapter, Krishna stated, Bhoktaram yajnatapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram. For that I am the enjoyer of all rituals and austerities, being the master of all the worlds. The ritualistic Brahmanas thought they were enjoyers of rituals, and Buddhism and Advaita renounced rituals for liberation. Since both are rejected in this verse, through this verse we can see the debunking of 2500 years of Indian history as simply a deviation from the Vedic path. The deviation began with Brahmanas doing rituals for material results, followed by Buddhists rejecting these rituals along with the self, followed by Advaita rejecting Buddhism to establish the supremacy of the self. Each of these is a false path. Rituals are done for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord, not for one's own pleasure. Renunciation is not external abandonment of duties, but the internal abandonment of lust. Yoga is not meditating on the self, but working for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. If people had just understood this one verse, 2500 years of Indian history would be seen as a complete waste of time because the contradictions of this history are rejected in this verse. History is often like a pendulum. If we deviate to one extreme, history deviates to the other extreme in retaliation, because extremes deny each other when the truth combines them. The swinging pendulum is not progress, regardless of how many times it swings. Progress is coming out of these extremes to understand that sannyas is renouncing lust rather than renouncing action. And yoga is action for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord, not inaction. Going from lusty action to inaction, or from no self to self supremacy, is a swinging pendulum rather than progress. In the video on chapter 5, we discussed how people have invented false ideas of yoga that focus their awareness on their material bodies. A materialistic person thinks that by making the body beautiful, he has made the self beautiful. In monotheistic religions, the soul is breath in the body, and this body resurrects to go to heaven. So, monotheistic religions think that the temporary material body is the eternal spiritual body. That making the material body beautiful is same as making a spiritual body beautiful. So body improvement is self-improvement. We can never talk about renunciation with such people. It is very hard to explain to them that real yoga is about making the soul beautiful rather than the body beautiful, and the two are not the same. Factually, the soul is eternally beautiful, and that beauty is its capacity for genuine love and happiness. For example, when a woman becomes pregnant, she becomes more beautiful due to the love for her child, even if there is bodily discomfort. Similarly, when a person is loved, he feels joyful and becomes more beautiful. So, beauty exists eternally in everyone as their capacity to love and to be happy through loving relationships. But this love and beauty is destroyed if one identifies with the body, because the soul is giving and the body is needy. As we focus on bodily needs, love is replaced by selfishness. Once love dies, slowly relationships die, then happiness dies, and eventually beauty dies. Now, the ugly, unhappy, and selfish person tries to make the body beautiful to get love. He may start yoga to make the body beautiful and create a fake yoga. The real yoga is about restoring one's loving tendency to become happy and beautiful, whereas fake yoga is about making the body beautiful to receive others' love. But internally, there is no love, so even if somebody is attracted by the bodily beauty, the relationship and happiness remain elusive. Real yoga requires going from lust to love. Giving up lust is detachment from the body. When we stop obsessing about our bodily lust, we can start loving. When we love the right person, we are loved back, and that makes us beautiful. Even the body becomes beautiful by loving. But if we identify with the body, we cannot love. We don't get love, we become unhappy, and the body becomes ugly. Thus, all residents of the spiritual world are extremely beautiful because real beauty is love in them, which makes a person happy, which makes their mind and body beautiful. Outward beauty is due to inward love. Therefore, love and beauty are two sides of a coin. The most loving personalities in the spiritual world are Radha and Krishna, and so they are also the most beautiful. Meanwhile, the selfish, egoistic, and narcissistic person initially becomes cruel and eventually he becomes ugly. This is why all demons are shown as ugly. They are not always ugly from a bodily perspective. They can also be very attractive, but their minds are filled with lust and cruelty, so they are shown as ugly creatures. We can see this through the lives of selfish people at present. Even if they are born beautiful, their focus on their lust destroys all relationships, which makes them lonely and unhappy, and then they become ugly. Now they go for plastic surgery, eating vitamins, lifting weights, applying cosmetics, and doing diets to become attractive to receive other person's love when they originally destroyed love through their selfishness. There are many stories in the Vedic texts about people going to the forest and performing severe austerities. But when a little material allurement comes, they renounce their renunciation. For example, there was a great sage, Vishwamitra, who performed severe austerities. Then Indra sent a heavenly damsel, Menaka, and Vishwamitra left his meditation and had sexual intercourse with Menaka. But in contrast, Haridas Thakur was so absorbed in chanting the names of Hari that a beautiful girl came to have sexual intercourse with him. But Haridas Thakur asked her to wait until he finished chanting the names of Hari. For 3 consecutive nights, that girl waited and Haridas Thakur chanted the entire time. Eventually, that girl was purified and Haridas Thakur never renounced his renunciation. So, this is the example of how sannyas requires attachment to Krishna. And unless one is attached, outward renunciation makes him a cheaper version of Vishwamitra. There is a flip side to this prescription as well, namely, we cannot become attached to Krishna unless we become detached from the world. Just like if we have to go from A to B, then we must leave A before we can reach B. Similarly, we have to give up the material attachments before we can become attached to Krishna. All material attachments originate in the attachment to the body. For example, if someone has a Western body, he remains attached to Western culture, religion, and ideology. Outwardly, he might do rituals, but inwardly he cannot give up his identification with his Western body and therefore the identification with Western culture, religion, and ideology. So, if we say Western ideology is false, immoral, and miserable, the person attached to his bodily identity feels offended. He doesn't feel offended if we say that African ideology is bad or Chinese ideology is bad. All those criticisms are okay because the person doesn't identify as African or Chinese. Criticism of Western ideology is taken as a personal attack because the person identifies with his Western body. Such a person cannot become a yogi. His identification with his present material body is so strong that even the criticism of false, immoral, and miserable ideology is taken as a personal attack. Without renouncing false identity, there is no true identity. And so Krishna says, Nahi asanyasast sankalpa yogi bhavati kaschana, which means that one who cannot renounce his mental attachments can never become a yogi. The word sankalpa means ideas or beliefs. What are these beliefs? They include ideas such as I am Indian, American, European, African, white, black, man, woman, etc. These are not attributes of the soul. These are just attributes of the current body. And yet, most people claiming to be sannyasis and yogis cannot give up attachment to their material bodies. To warn them, Krishna says, Nahi asanyasasta sankalpa yogi bhavati kaschana. You can never become a yogi unless you renounce these false mental concoctions. In case of Arjun, the attachment is to his family. Arjun doesn't want to kill his family members even if they are adharmic. And so, Krishna says, you can never become a yogi unless you give up these attachments and be prepared to kill your family to protect dharma. Therefore, yoga is not so simple. The yogi has to undergo the test of renunciation. If one fails at renunciation, yoga is finished. He becomes a person who keeps rowing a boat tied to the shore. In order to arrive at a destination, we must depart from the origin. If we cannot depart, we cannot arrive. Therefore, the first step of yoga is to give up false, immoral, and miserable ideas. One has to give up bad association and take good association. Without giving up bad association, taking good association is compared to an elephant's bath. An elephant goes into river and takes bath. Then he comes out of the river and throws sand on his body. So, if one doesn't discard attachments to false ideologies, his spiritual practice becomes an elephant's bath, which means useless. Therefore, yoga or attachment and sannyasa or detachment are two sides of a coin. We don't get attachment without detachment, and we don't get detachment without attachment. In the Updeshamrita, Sri Rupa Goswami calls this Sangatyaga Sato Vritte, which means give up bad association and take good association. Both are necessary because one is not enough. In earlier chapters, we discussed how premature renunciation leads to immorality rather than liberation. However, in this verse, Krishna explains how an advanced person who has performed all of his duties without expectation of results can renounce those duties to make further progress. In the Varnashram system, the first half of the life is spent in doing one's duties without expectation of results. And when one has mastered that life of duty, then the second half of life is spent in renouncing these duties. Thus, renunciation is neither forbidden for the advanced yogi nor is renunciation prescribed for the neophyte. That is because of the inversions we have discussed earlier, caused by the guna. If a neophyte renounces his duties, he enters the state of tamoguna. He doesn't want to work hard and may even lack the skills to work. So, like a monkey calls the grapes sour after failing to get grapes, he renounces the pursuit of grapes. However, the desire for grapes doesn't go away. In fact, after pretending to renounce, he starts living off the labor of other people, enjoys the grapes offered by them, but gives them nothing. This is how prematurely renounced sannyasis become lazy sensualists. They were not successful in getting grapes, so they called the grapes sour and then they started feeding on grapes given by others while pretending to be renounced. Real renunciation is internal and not external. Internal renunciation means one has no desire for enjoyment. If something is received easily and automatically, it is accepted to maintain the body. But the renounced person doesn't seek more than necessary for sustenance. Even after receiving what is required for sustenance, the renounced person engages in the service of the greater good. This type of renunciation is eternal. But external renunciation without internal detachment is not long lasting. Many people take sannyas because it helps them collect followers. Neophytes think that if someone is a sannyasi, he must be advanced, but those who enter sannyas may not be internally renounced. So Krishna says that the neophyte must work and the advanced yogi can renounce. But if someone takes sannyas to collect followers or simply because he doesn't want to work, he starts enjoying after sannyas and sets a bad example for others to follow. The implication here is that Arjun is in the preliminary stage and not the advanced stage. Therefore, Arjun has to work and he cannot renounce his duties on the pretext of being very advanced, because that pretension will not give him spiritual progress. Instead, he will become a lazy sensualist. Through Arjun, Krishna warns ordinary people about imitating an advanced yogi. The true yogi has internal renunciation, but a neophyte does not. Then, if he renounces externally, he cannot give anyone renunciation, knowledge, and devotion, while he lives off their charity. To make this difference more intuitive, the example of a newly planted sapling is given. A sapling is surrounded by a protective fence to defend it from animals. But when that sapling grows up into a strong tree, then even the elephant cannot shake it, and the fence is not required. However, if the newly planted sapling equates itself to a strong tree and removes the protective fence, then even small animals easily destroy it. And so, moral duties are neither necessary for everyone nor optional for everyone. Just like we put a fence around a newly planted sapling, but that fence is not required for the fully grown tree. Similarly, moral duties are necessary for the beginner and they are inessential for the advanced personality. In the Bhagavad Purana, we find the life stories of Jadbharat and Lord Rishabdev, who renounce their social duties and walk the earth like madmen. If ordinary people imitate them, then they will simply be madmen and not enlightened. Therefore, we can say that the spiritually advanced can be madmen, but madmen are not spiritually advanced. Exactly like that, the advanced yogi can renounce duties, but the neophytes cannot. All of us have two kinds of senses, called the senses of knowledge and senses of action. These are also called Jnanendriya and Karmendriya. Through the senses of knowledge, we enjoy the world, and through the senses of action, we do the work required for future enjoyment. Now, if someone is endlessly enjoying the fruits of labor through the senses of knowledge, it is obvious that he is not renounced. But it is also possible that a person works day and night without enjoyment to acquire things for future enjoyment. In this case, it is not obvious that he is not renounced. For example, some people work hard to attain a higher status in life, and while working, they don't enjoy what they acquire. And during this work, it might seem that they are very renounced. But in their mind, they are working for future enjoyment. And so, their seeming renunciation of enjoyment while working is not factual renunciation because the enjoyment has only been postponed. These two conditions are described in this verse as acting for sense enjoyment and engaging in fruitive activity. They pertain to immediate enjoyment and postponed enjoyment. For example, many people work day and night and then go on vacations. While they are working, it may seem that they are renounced, but during a vacation, we can see that they are not renounced. And so, Krishna defines the elevated stage of yoga as one in which one neither indulges in fulfillment of the desires of the senses of knowledge, nor does he work to produce results for future enjoyment. The yogi is neither on vacation nor working for a future vacation. Rather, the yogi is Sarva Sankalpa Sannyasi, which means renounced in every thought. His work is not motivated by thoughts of future vacation, and when the results of that work are obtained, he doesn't go on vacation. His work is his vacation. Therefore, he goes on working without vacation. When work is done to enjoy a vacation, we get a cycle of work and vacation. At one time, we see renunciation and then we see sensuality. By renunciation, someone appears very saintly, and by sensuality, he appears fallen. But he was always fallen because his so called renunciation was motivated by sensuality. So, the symptom of false renunciation is the cycle of renunciation and sensuality. But the symptom of true renunciation is the absence of this cycle. Most people consider renunciation suffering and sensuality pleasure. But renunciation for a yogi is not suffering because he does the labor of love which makes him happy rather than miserable. He doesn't need a break from work because work is worship for him. Those who need break from work also need a break from worship. So while they are worshipping, they are not motivated by worship but by sense enjoyment, and they delay their gratification to a later stage and pretend to worship. These days, we see many religions whose main objective is global conquest. They claim that they will conquer the world and spread their religious ideology to the whole world, bring everyone under the control of a global government, and after that, some Messiah will come to rule over the world for 1,000 years, and then everyone will go to heaven. This imperial colonial ideology is not confined to one religion. When one religion tries to globalize itself, it runs into conflict with other religions trying to globalize themselves or prevent their annihilation. The net result of this desire for global conquest is war, destruction, and death. The ideology of globalization of one religion simply results in mutually assured destruction. Then no Messiah can come, nobody will rule the world for 1,000 years, and nobody will go to heaven. And yet, all the fools who believe in this ideology will kill each other and then go to hell instead of heaven. But if we tell their followers that your ideology is a gateway to hell, they are deeply offended. They can't see what their religious ideology is doing to them, and they don't like to accept their own future. Now, one might argue that even Krishna asks Arjun to fight a war. So, what's the difference? The answer is proactive versus reactive and truth versus delusion. Dharmic war is waged to preserve the truth established by reason, observation, and practice, while religious war is waged to preserve the delusion contrary to reason, observation, and practice. Those not interested in dharma are often left alone if they are not interested in dharma and if they don't attack dharma. So, dharmic war is also reactive. Meanwhile, religious war is proactive and waged on those not interested in religion, despite the fact that it is contrary to reasoning, observation, and practice. But these are not the only differences. Additionally, dharmic war requires the control of mind, and religious war is created by an uncontrolled mind. One who conquers his mind doesn't need to conquer the world, and one who cannot conquer his mind needs to conquer the world to placate his own anxieties about his beliefs. Of course, the controlled mind doesn't sit idle when attacked. It responds to attacks and prepares for such attacks. But those who control the mind minimize war to reactive defense, while those who don't control the mind maximize the war to proactive attacks. One who controls the mind urges everyone to end all wars, either by coming to the provable truth or by letting people choose. But one who can't control his mind urges everyone to fight wars to conquer the world, to destroy the truth, during which he sows the seeds of his self destruction. One who controls the mind moves toward eternal peace, but one who doesn't control the mind moves toward never ending wars in which he is eventually destroyed both from inside and outside. So, Dharmic war is not religious war. Dharmic war is fought for preserving the provable truth, and religious war for establishing the counterfactual beliefs. Dharmic war is fought for defense, and religious war for conquest. Dharma talks about the conquest of the mind, while religion talks about the conquest of the world. The main struggle in Dharma is internal, and the main struggle in religion is external. Of course, those who think that they will go to heaven after conquering the world are fools. They don't realize that even if they went to heaven, they would start a war to conquer heaven, after which their heaven will become hell. Therefore, nature preemptively sends such people to hell to ensure that they do not contaminate the heaven with war. Only those who conquer their mind are allowed to enter heaven because only such people can eternally live in peace with the peaceful. Without internal peace, there can never be external peace. Thus, Krishna says that the mind can be a friend or an enemy. The mind controlling the soul is the soul's enemy, and the soul controlling the mind makes the mind the soul's friend. However, Krishna also says that we cannot control the mind unless we realize the Paramatma in the heart, because without such a realization, the mind is always disturbed. The disturbance inside becomes the disturbance outside. So, one who realizes the presence of the Paramatma within becomes peaceful, while those who don't realize his presence remain agitated. Since Paramatma is present in everyone's heart, everyone can be peaceful. However, if we don't realize his presence, we remain agitated. The implication is that Kauravas are agitated because they don't know the Paramatma within. Their atrocities force even the Pandavas to fight. However, The Pandavas must not fight due to agitation. Rather, they should fight with perfect mental peace and tranquility. To understand the presence of Paramatma in the heart, we have to delve into the philosophy of meaning and purpose. Each thing is one ideal meaning, some possible meanings, and many impossible meanings. For example, a pen is ideally just a pen, but it can be non-ideally used as a weapon, paperweight, and ornament. But it cannot be used as a ship, airplane, or car. However, even if we recognize that a pen is ideally just a pen, the pen can still be used to write the truth or fiction. So, being a pen is the ideal meaning, and being used to write the truth is the ideal purpose. Both of these are called artha in Sanskrit, and the philosophy of dharma is then tied to the philosophy of artha in Mimamsa, which means that when we do our duty, then we are situated in our ideal purpose. Artha makes the world meaningful and purposeful because there is always an ideal meaning and purpose. In case of each person, the soul is the meaning and the supreme soul is the purpose. The soul is like a pen and the supreme soul is like the purpose of writing the truth. If the meaning is known, the pen won't be used as an ornament, weapon, or paperweight, but it can still be used to write fiction. But if the purpose of writing is the truth is known, then even fiction would not be written. Self realization is like knowing that I am a pen, and God realization is like knowing that my purpose is writing the truth. So, self realization is incomplete without God realization. Thus, everything in the world is unique meanings, but there is a universal purpose. One thing can be a pen and another thing can be a sword, but both pen and sword have a common purpose. The Paramatma is that common purpose. When he is known, everything is perfect. The Paramatma is the guide in everyone's heart, telling us what our true purpose is, while we are meanings like pens and swords. We cannot invent our purpose, so we are not free individuals. But we can choose to ignore our true purpose and then, like a pen, be used as an ornament or weapon. The pen will never be the best ornament or weapon. So, not knowing the Paramatma means the soul does not know itself. This self ignorant soul is always confused and disturbed because it doesn't know why it exists and what it has to do. This disturbed soul invents fictional identities and fights with others. But when the true identity is known, this fighting ends unless that fighting is the purpose that Paramatma wants fulfilled. When the purpose is given by Paramatma, then there is inner peace, even as there may be outward war. Right now, Arjun is internally disturbed and outwardly peaceful. But Krishna tells Arjun to be inwardly peaceful and outwardly fighting. This art of fighting with tranquility is the essence of all martial arts. The mind is controlled and peaceful, and yet the body fights. All these martial arts were developed in India to create Kshatriyas who fight with a peaceful mind. When the mind is peaceful, it is focused and perceptive and makes no mistakes. Meanwhile, each warrior tries to agitate the other warrior's mind so they become angry and disturbed because then they will make mistakes. So, this is the real art of war, namely, get mind control, become peaceful, and then you will make no mistakes. Meanwhile, try to agitate the other person's mind so he will make mistakes. There is an ancient Chinese book called The Art of War, which teaches various kinds of deceptions. But that is not the real art of war. The real art is to know the Paramatma so that the mind is not disturbed, and then try to disturb your opponent's mind. Wait for him to make mistakes and capitalize on their mistakes. Warriors like Arjun were taught about mind control during war, so this is not news to him. But Krishna reminds Arjun of what he already knows, so this point is made subtly and its connection to war may be missed. During the Mahabharat war, we see that warriors don't just throw weapons at each other. They also insult each other as cowards, weaklings, and quitters. This is the worst type of insult for a Kshatriya. When he is agitated by such insults, he makes mistakes. But one who has conquered the mind is not agitated by insults. So, lust and anger during war are weaknesses to be exploited. One who gains control over the mind conquers the anger against defeat and lust for victory. He has strategic thinking. He can focus on the Paramatma, and that is the mindset of a great warrior. Thus, mind control is not just for Brahmanas or those sitting in a forest. Mind control is also seen on the battlefield when one is surrounded by death and destruction and still remains calm. War with mind control was developed as martial arts in India, and it traveled to many parts of Asia. Then fighting and peace got intermixed, and most people did not understand the underlying philosophy. The philosophy is given here, and it is that one has to gain full control over the mind and fight with a peaceful mind. Victory is assured for a peaceful mind and defeat for a disturbed mind. Of course, when these martial arts with mind control went out of India, the Paramatma was gradually removed, and yet the martial artists talk about keeping a peaceful mind during war. And thus, at present, it seems that martial arts is a separate discipline from yoga. It is not. Yoga and martial arts were one thing for the Kshatriyas, but later on the Paramatma was replaced by Buddhist ideas of no self. So, in all Japanese and Chinese martial arts, they talk about emptying the mind. But in this verse, Krishna doesn't talk about emptying the mind. He talks about knowing the Paramatma as the real guide of the soul. The empty mind gets no guidance, but the mind focused on the Paramatma gets guidance. So, this is the real martial art, and it is also yoga. In chapter 5, Krishna explained equanimity as follows: Vidya Vinay Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastini Suni Chaiva Sapakecha Pandita Samadarshina. It means the humble sages, by virtue of true knowledge, see with equal vision a learned and gentle Brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog eater. While discussing this verse, we had noted that equal vision is not equality. Because if cow, elephant, and dog were equal, these names would themselves become redundant. This equal vision is rather about emotional disposition towards different things rather than cognitively equalizing them. This equal vision is described again in two verses. The first verse says that the self realized person considers pebbles, stones, and gold the same. The second verse says that self realized person considers friends and enemies and the pious and sinners to be the same. We have to remember that this is not about cognitive equality but emotional disposition. The basic principle of equanimity is that a person is not attracted or repulsed by anyone or anything. Attraction is caused by Rajoguna and revulsion is caused by Tamoguna. We are attracted to something when we think it will fulfill some desire, and we are repulsed by something if we think it will hurt our desire. But imagine you're walking down a street filled with other people who neither fulfill any desire nor hurt those desires. Most normal people will be indifferent toward the people walking on the street, neither attracted to them nor repulsed by them. This neutral state of neither attraction nor revulsion is called sattva guna. Almost everyone is in sattva guna some of the times, but hardly anyone is indifferent toward gold. Generally, everyone is attracted toward gold, which is rajoguna tendency. Likewise, everyone is attracted toward friend and repulsed by enemies. The friends trigger rajoguna and the enemies trigger tamoguna. Thus, everyone is cycling through these three guna called sattva, rajas, and tamas. We are attracted toward some, repulsed against others, and indifferent toward yet others. Due to this, we are not equanimous. But Krishna explains in these verses that a yogi is equanimous towards everyone. He is not attracted toward anyone, nor is he repulsed by anyone. That doesn't mean he does not understand the difference between gold and pebbles, or between sinful and pious. He knows the difference, and yet he is not delighted if someone gives him gold and not depressed if someone gives him pebbles. He is not thrilled if someone praises him and not dejected if someone criticizes him. So, equanimity means emotional calmness and composure rather than ignorance. This equanimity is also called pure sattva or shuddha sattva, which means sattva guna not mixed with rajoguna or tamoguna. Krishna describes this as the trait of a yogi. Two kinds of equanimity are described here. The initial equanimity is towards inanimate things like gold and pebble, and an even more advanced type of equanimity is towards different kinds of people, such as friends, enemies, and neutral. In the next 5 verses, Krishna describes the practice of mystical yoga. It begins by going to a solitary place, laying down a mat of kusha grass and covering it with deer skin and soft cloth. Then sitting on that mat with a straight body, neck, and head, and focusing one's awareness on the tip of the nose. One has to completely renounce sex life and possessions. Living in solitude means devoid of any relationships or attachments. When the mind is focused through such concentration, it becomes very calm. One comes to the point of becoming indifferent and equanimous to friends and foes, pebble and gold, because attraction and revulsion are disturbances of the mind. But when the mind is focused and becomes steady, then both attraction and revulsion disappear. Once this calmness is achieved, then the yogi meditates upon the Paramatma in the heart. This meditation is not possible until the mind is free of all attachment and attraction. In the last chapter, Krishna described the process of concentration as focusing between the eyebrows. In this chapter, he describes it as focusing on the tip of the nose. There is only one yoga posture, namely a straight body, spine, neck, and head. This practice is done while living in a secluded place after renouncing relationships and possessions. This is also how yoga is described in the Yoga Sutra composed by sage Patanjali. There are restrictions called yama and routines called niyama. There is only one sitting posture called sukhasana, just like in these verses. Finally, the goal of these postures is to bring the body and mind under control and to free it of the rajoguna and tamoguna tendencies mentioned as equanimity in the previous verses. The material existence is the place of immense disturbance because it is always driven by lust. When the lust is fulfilled, greed and pride comes. But when lust is not fulfilled, anger and envy comes. In between the two, a person remains confused about whether he is fulfilled enough to not want more or whether he should compete with others to attain what they have attained. If he decides to compete, the same cycle of greed and pride or anger and envy repeats. There is only one solution to this problem, and that is satisfaction, contentment, and peacefulness. However, attaining contentment requires a person to control their mind and not be afflicted by lust, anger, greed, pride, envy, and confusion. As discussed in the previous verses, the controlled mind is not aggravated by desire or aversion. To attain this state, the previous verses recommended that the person focus their awareness on the tip of the nose or in between the eyebrows. When the awareness is fixed, the mind stops moving and the person experiences peace. Normally, everyone understands lust, anger, greed, pride, envy, and confusion, but nobody understands peace. In fact, if we tell people about peace, they reject it because they think that they will fulfill their desires and get pleasures. But they don't think about what comes after this pleasure, namely greed, pride, anger, envy, and confusion. So most people focus on pleasure and never think about the entire cycle of pleasure, pain, and deprivation. This rare person who does that is described here as Shantim Nirvana Paramam, which means peaceful, superior, and extinguished. Lust, anger, greed, pride, envy, and confusion are extinguished. So a person exits the cycle of deprivation, pleasure, and pain. He is superior to those entangled in this cycle and he is peaceful. As we discussed earlier, this is also called Shuddha Sattva or pure Sattva, and it is beyond material existence. Krishna calls this state Mat Sanstham, which means my arrangement or my world, describing the spiritual world. In this world, lust is replaced by love, anger is replaced by satisfaction, greed is replaced by sacrifice, pride is replaced by humility, envy is replaced by gratitude, and confusion is replaced by clarity. Since all the emotions in the spiritual world are inverted compared to the material world, therefore the material world is called the inversion of the spiritual world. The inversion doesn't mean the absence of relationship, activity, thoughts, or persons. It is rather the absence of lust, anger, greed, pride, envy, and confusion. So, in one sense, the spiritual world is just like the material world. There are plants and trees, rivers and mountains, birds and animals, flowers and fruits, homes and people. But in another sense, all of them are loving, satisfied, sacrificing, humble, grateful, and clear, which means the opposite of the material world. Impersonalists misrepresent the spiritual reality as oneness, as if the destruction of all individuality, variety, and activity is the only way to attain peace. Impersonalism is not actually a philosophy of peace because it is predicated on replacing individuality with universality, variety with commonality, and activity with inactivity. Someone who wants to end their individuality and activity are welcome to do so. While this part of impersonalism is self-destructive, it is accepted because everyone is allowed self-destruction. However, the impersonalist tries to force this self-destructiveness on everyone else when he demands the end of variety. At this point, impersonalism becomes universalism, and that immediately leads to conflicts. So, whenever impersonalism arrives, we get conflict rather than peace. Peace is possible only if we accept infinite variety united by love, satisfaction, sacrifice, humility, gratitude, and clarity, not when we try to destroy personhood. We know this destructiveness of impersonalism through history because when it arrived, its followers rejected Purana, Itihasa, Tantra, Veda, and most Upanishads. After that, the Vedic tradition broke into many conflicting schools because impersonalism excluded everyone other than itself from the Vedic tradition. So, both through philosophy and history, we can understand that exclusivism leads to conflict rather than peace. The sannyasi is called liberated and the grahastha is called entangled. The four classes are rejected as material illusions, as are all the rituals, deities, and mantras. So we have to understand that the claim of peace through the destruction of individuality is factually a false claim. It is rather the recipe for conflict and division rather than peace and unity. In the next two verses, Krishna describes Yama and Niyama. Yama is the deity of death and punishment. When a sinful person dies, he is taken to Yama, who decides how the sinful person is punished. So, Yama is also present in yoga as self restraint. To avoid being punished for excessive indulgence, the yogi restrains himself. This self restraint is described as not eating too much, nor eating too little, and not sleeping too much, nor sleeping too little. The reason is that neither too little nor too much eating can be sustained. If we eat too little, the body will be emaciated and weakened, and then we cannot even sit with a straight spine, neck, and head. Instead, we will lie down out of weakness. Similarly, if we eat too much, again we cannot sit with a straight spine, neck, and head. The legs will not fold and the person will feel sleepy due to overeating. Similarly, if we sleep too little, then the mind will be overstimulated and we cannot concentrate the mind. But if we sleep too much, then the body will slump and cannot sit straight. So, yama means self restraint from all kinds of excessiveness. Some people may call it leading a balanced life. After saying what must not be done, Krishna says what must be done. It is not enough to simply say don't eat too much or too little. We have to also say eat at fixed times. At those fixed times, we don't eat too much or too little. But fixing the quantity of food is not enough. The times of eating must also be fixed. Similarly, it is not enough to stop too much or too little sleeping. The time of sleeping must also be fixed. For example, if we have to sleep for 8 hours, we can't sleep any time we want. We have to have fixed times of sleeping. We should not work too much or too little, but the time of working must also be fixed. We should not indulge in too little or too much recreation, but the time of recreation must also be fixed. These two are yama and niyama. As we all know, the body maintains internal clocks, due to which hunger, sleep, energy, and relaxation also follow cycles. Generally speaking, those who work and eat in the day feel energized during the day. They need to relax in the evening and sleep during the night. But someone who sleeps during the day will feel energized in the evening and work and eat during the night. The body can adapt the clock if we change our habits, after which our habits of eating, sleeping, working, and recreation will also be changed. Ideally, nature has given a proper routine for life based on sunrise and sunset. So the yogi follows this natural routine and sets his body clock in alignment with nature's clock. This alignment makes it easy to concentrate the mind because there is a fixed time for practicing yoga as well. And at that time, the body naturally attains the restful and peaceful state based on its prior developed habits acclimatized through bioclocks. So, yama and niyama is not an optional thing in yoga. They are rather the precondition for doing yoga. A person who cannot control his eating and sleeping or cannot follow a strict routine cannot do yoga because even when he sits down to concentrate the mind, the body will remain disturbed. So the person cannot even sit straight, then what to speak of concentrating the mind? This is not a topic of debate, but something that each person has to realize in their own lives. If they follow yama and niyama, then they can concentrate the mind, otherwise, not. Finally, Krishna says that by following this process, one can remove all the material pains. That means all the diseases of the body and mind arise out of unregulated eating, sleeping, recreation, and work. These days, urban life has become extremely unregulated. For example, during the weekdays, people work till late, wake up late, sometimes skip meals, then eat twice the food at once, then spend time in meaningless meetings, and have no time left for recreation. Then, when the weekend arrives, they sleep a lot and spend most of the time on recreation to compensate for the deprivation during the weekdays. The workplace creates arbitrary deadlines and holidays, but the body doesn't know about deadlines, holidays, weekdays, and weekends. The body is a clock, and people disturb that clock due to unregulated life. So, modern urban life is basically antithetical to yoga practice and the harbinger of all kinds of bodily and mental diseases. Then, when the disease arrives, people eat all kinds of drugs and painkillers. Then, someone tells them about a new kind of diet, exercise, and supplement. In this way, foolish people who have no idea about healthy life keep doing chemistry experiments on their own body. And this increases their bodily and mental diseases. A sick person cannot do yoga. So, after wasting their entire life on unregulated living, they become incapable of yoga as well. Therefore, anyone who wants to avoid a sickly life must follow Krishna's advice and establish a strict discipline of yama and niyama in their life. The Yoga Sutra by sage Patanjali begins by stating Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which means yoga is putting an end to the vritti of the chitta. These same terms are used in each of these three verses. For example, verse 13 says, Yada viniyatam chittam atmani evavatishthate, which means when the chitta is controlled, one is situated in the self. Likewise, verse 19 says, Yogino yatachittasya yunjato yogam atmanaha, which means a yogi is one whose chitta is united with the self in meditation. Similarly, verse 20 says, Yat Yatro paramate chittam niruddham yoga sevaya, which means where the chitta is silenced by the practice of yoga. So each of these three verses is talking the same thing as the first verse of Yoga Sutra, namely, yoga is putting an end to the vritti of the chitta. So let us understand what chitta is, what its vritti is, how the self is related to the chitta, what is controlling the chitta, what is union of the self and the chitta, and what is silencing the chitta. The simple example is a person and a mirror. The self or Atma is the person. and the chitta is the mirror in which a person sees himself. We can call these two the self and the self-image or self-portrait. Normally, everyone thinks that we see the world, then we see our place in the world, and then through the relation between the world and ourselves, we form a self-image. For example, someone might say that I own a lot of property. So due to my ownership of property, I am rich. But there are two problems in this way of thinking. First, someone may own a lot of property and still not consider himself rich. Second, someone may not own any property and yet consider himself rich. So, this idea about the self image being created through a relation between the body and the world is factually false. It also requires us to believe that we are the body and the world is many additional bodies, and the self is an emergent property of the body world relationship. This is indeed how Buddhism describes the self, or rather the illusion of it. Buddhism says that there are mutually related bodies such as owner and property, and they create the idea of a self as a rich man. But as we just described, someone can feel rich without owning anything, and someone can feel poor after owning everything. And so, we need another understanding of the self image. The basic idea is that the self image is the first thing created in the world. That is because the world is constructed as a dream. So, for example, when we start dreaming, we see an image of ourselves in the dream, but we identify with that image. Then we also see a world around that self image. But the self image comes first, and the world image comes from the self image. For example, while sitting at home, I might think that I am an employee, and then I will think of the office in which I work, and then mentally I would be immediately in the office. Then, when I am factually in the office, I might suddenly remember that I am a father, and then I will think of the home, and then mentally I would be immediately in the home. Then, while driving a car, I might think that I am a devotee of Krishna, and then I will think of the temple, and then mentally I would be immediately in the temple. So, the first step is me thinking who I am, which can be employee or father or devotee. And then immediately a world is created around me in the mind, which can be the office or home or temple. Then, of course, I may be jolted out of my daydream and put back into another world, which forces another identity upon me. But if I strongly identify with some identity, then I will try to change my world so that I can assert the identity that I really like. And so the self image and the world are mutually connected. The world can force a change of self image, and the self image can force a change of the world. But in the long run, the self image wins and changes the world. That means if I think that I am a devotee, then I'll be thinking of the temple, whether I am at home or at office or in the car. Once in a while, I may be forced to change my identity to become an employee or father. But if I love my devotee identity, then I will revert back to that identity as soon as the worldly pressure is gone. In short, my world depends on my self image, both in the sense that I can mentally change the world even when I am in a different world, and in the sense that I can bodily change the world to what I prefer as my self identity. The Buddhist idea that the self identity is created by my presence in the world is a factually false idea because I can daydream a different world and then change reality to that daydream. The change in the world based on the change in the self identity is how the soul is transported to a different body and world after death. The person thinks of a self identity, which creates a world, and nature transports the soul to that self identity and world in the next life. That is just like I might think of myself as a devotee and then go to a temple. So nature fulfills our desire. Nature says, at the last moment of your life, you wanted to be something, and I will put you in the self identity and world that you wanted to be. Likewise, the soul originally comes to the world based on some self identity. The soul thinks that it is some identity, and nature puts the soul in that identity and world. Thus, the same principle applies during daydreaming while we change our world based on our self image at the time of death and when we first entered the material world. The principle is that the self gets a self image and then gets a mind, body, and world. Now we can talk about the chitta. The chitta is the creator of self image or our self conception. The soul asks, who am I? The chitta answers, you are a father, mother, employer, employee, devotee, or atheist. The chitta creates the identity in terms of gender, nationality, race, age, etc. That means even if I am in a male body, my chitta can say, you are female. Even if I am old, my chitta can say, you are young. Even if I am poor, my chitta can say, you are rich. Even if I am sick, my chitta can say, you are healthy. Even if I am sitting in the office, the chitta can say, you are a father. Even if I am driving on the street, the chitta can say, you are a devotee. Then, based on these varied self identities, immediately a new world will be created in the mind. Then, at the time of death, even the body and world will change. Now comes the question of steady and unsteady chitta. A steady chitta is one in which one's self identity is fixed. Every time the soul asks, who am I? The chitta gives a fixed answer, you are this. Hence, all the varied answers like I am father, mother, employer, employee, citizen, gender, nationality, race, etc. are called chitta vritti, which means modification or variations of self identity created by the chitta. And when the self identity is fixed, then that is called chitta vritti nirodha, which means the end of varied identities and fixation into one identity. Now the question arises, why will I be fixed into some identity? Why will my self identity stop changing? The answer is that it is possible only when my self identity is what I truly am. My self identity stops changing when that identity becomes my true nature. That means all the varied and changing self identities are temporary and false identities, while the fixed self identity is eternal and true. At this time, the self and the self identity are basically the same. To illustrate this with an example, think of buying some clothes in a store. You walk into a store and pick different clothes to try on. Then you take these clothes to the trial room and start putting them on one by one. You wear the first dress and it doesn't fit. Then you wear the second dress and it doesn't fit. Like that, you change your dress many times until you find the dress that fits perfectly. When the dress fits perfectly, you might say, oh, this dress was made just for me. The self identity created by the chitta is just like the dresses we put on. We go to a shopping mall and go on changing dresses until we find the dress that fits us perfectly. At this juncture, the soul and the chitta become identical. Of course, they are not literally identical because someone can throw away a perfectly fitting dress and wear a badly fitting dress. But they are identical as long as we keep wearing the best fitting dress. Now we can understand all the verses we have noted above. The first one from Yoga Sutra is Yogaha Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which means yoga is putting an end to the vritti of chitta. Yes, these vritti were badly fitting dresses, and once we found the perfect dress, we put an end to the trial and error of different dresses. The second one is Yada Viniyatam Chittam Atmani Evavatishthate, which means when the chitta is controlled, one is situated in the self. Yes, we find the perfect dress, then we are wearing that dress forever, and that is also our true nature. The third one is Yogino Yata Chittasya Yunjato Yogam Atmanaha, which means a yogi is one whose chitta is united with the self in meditation. Yes, the dress is the self identity. So the self and the self identity are united because the self found its true eternal identity. The fourth one is Yatro Paramate Chittam Niruddham Yoga Sevaya, which means where the chitta is silenced by the practice of yoga. Yes, when the true self identity is known, the dissatisfaction with the varied and changing answers to who am I ends, and that makes a person peaceful. Finally comes the comparison to a lamp in a windless place. The flickering chitta is a lamp whose flame is disturbed by wind. The steady chitta is one in which the flame is not disturbed by any wind. That steady chitta is a person knowing who they truly are. The wind in this case is the cause of changing world. The world is changing. Our bodies and minds are also changing. And this change is caused by a prana and cosmic prana, which is called wind, because it is invisible to our sense perception. So the world, body, and mind are changing due to prana, and the mechanism of that change is invisible to our eyes. But as everything changes, we identify with the changed reality and change our self identity. The Buddhist idea that we change our self identity is true if all the changes are out of our control and we change our self identity as a side effect of worldly change. But it becomes false when we change our world after changing our self identity. The Vedic texts reject the Buddhist idea of no self based on a self being able to change its identity, world, body, and mind by its will. Since there is will, we are not simply driven to change by some moving wind. We can also control and direct that wind by our choice. In the Vedic text, the soul is described as Satchitanand. The chitta is the instrument or assistant for the chit of the soul. But since there is also Sat and Anand, so it is very difficult to maintain a steady chitta. The Sat is the relational aspect of the soul, the Anand is the emotional aspect, and the Chit is the cognitive aspect. For example, when the Chit asks, Who am I? And the Chitta answers, You are this, then this is not the end of the story. Due to Anand, the soul asks, Is this a pleasing identity? Do I like it? Does it make me happy? The answer to these questions is given by another instrument called the guna, which is the repository of likes and dislikes. For example, the chitta can say, You are an employee, but I might hate my job. So the guna rejects the answer and then the chitta gives another answer, such as, you are a father. And if I like that answer, then I dwell on that identity. And that puts my mind into the home. But I might not be able to run away from the office into the home immediately because I have to work to earn money. This force of circumstances is called karma, and due to karma, I cannot keep thinking that I am a father even though I like it. I am rather forced to think that I am an employee even though I hate it. So karma keeps me in the office, guna pushes me towards home, and the chitta keeps oscillating my identity between home and office. So one might ask, why is the chitta unsteady? The short answer is that chitta is not the only instrument. There is also guna and karma which keep forcing changes on the chitta. The soul is caught in the contradictions created by the chitta, guna, and karma. The karma forces circumstances upon us which we cannot avoid. The guna is likes and dislikes, so it pulls the soul in different directions. And the chitta tries to reconcile the pull of likes and dislikes against the circumstances that are forced upon the soul. For example, the guna may say, "You have worked long enough, now go home." But the karma will dictate how much I have to work to survive. So the chitta will reconcile the two by saying, "Work a little more and then you can go home." So guna pulls in one direction and karma pulls in another direction, and the chitta is caught between the two, trying to balance and reconcile. The pull and push of the chitta keeps it unsteady. For example, when we sit down to concentrate our mind, the guna will say, "Sitting in one place is so boring." Karma will dictate, "You have to eat, you have to work, you have to pay your bills." And chitta can try to reconcile. Let us do this for a few more minutes and then we can do what we want to do or what we have to do. So, this is the continuous turmoil going on in the mind. And so, Krishna tells Arjuna about controlling the mind. The circumstances created by karma force our thoughts. The desire arising due to guna force our thoughts. But the steady chitta counters these forces. We cannot blame guna and karma because they are the results of our past choices. We are in good or bad circumstances due to our actions. We have likes and dislikes due to previously cultivated habits. And we have the intellect and willpower to counter the forces of circumstances and habits. The struggle between chitta, guna, and karma is internal. The mind deviates, but by spiritual knowledge, which is called intellect here, we control it. As we focus our life on the eternal purpose, gradually the past karma reduces, the guna is altered, and the chitta is steadied. With a steadied chitta, we focus life even more on the eternal purpose. And with that, even more of the past karma ends, the guna is altered even more, and the chitta is even more steady. So, this is an iterative process. The progress is slow in the beginning, but if we remain steady, it picks up pace. Just like when a train starts, initially it moves slowly, then a little faster, and then at full speed. If we are impatient with the pace, we can use the impatience to increase our focus. But if our impatience is about lack of progress without increasing our focus, then the result is end of progress. In the next 6 verses, Krishna talks about the transcendental state of the Atma. The last three of these 6 verses, namely verse 30, 31, and 32, are very explicit in terms of seeing Krishna everywhere, seeing everything in Krishna, always worshipping Krishna in everything, and thus seeing everything to be just like oneself. However, the first 3 verses, namely verse 27, 28, and 29, do not refer to Krishna or the Paramatma, and they can be interpreted in two ways. The first way is that we can just talk about the self who sees everything in himself and himself in everything. In this stage, one is free from material idea of separateness, individualism, and selfishness. And this sense of oneness, which is not contradictory to difference, is the path by which one becomes free of the control of guna and karma. The second way of interpreting the same three verses is to explain them based on the later three verses, which explicitly refer to seeing Krishna and Paramatma everywhere. So, in these translations, Srila Prabhupada uses the later three verses to interpret the first three verses. It means that even though the first three verses only refer to the self or Atma, they are translated as referring to Krishna. This approach makes the translation much easier to understand, but someone can argue that these are not accurate translations. So, to address that concern, we have to understand that the self can be seen in everything and everything will be seen in the self if and only if all these selves are part of one whole, namely Krishna, and if Krishna is in each of these parts. If Krishna is not in everything and everything is not in Krishna, then even the self is not in everything and everything is not in the self. So the truth of verse 29 depends on the truth of the verse 30. And that allows us to take the simpler conclusion in which the Atma is fixed on Krishna rather than itself. This conclusion is possible only if we interpret all these six verses collectively rather than individually. To understand these verses, we have to discuss the whole part philosophy. We have done this before too, so here I will just use examples to illustrate the basic idea. Let's take the example of color and three shades of yellow, red, and blue. All the shades are included in the idea of color because if some shade was missing, then the idea of color would exclude that shade. Similarly, color is present in all shades because if it were not present in some shade, then we could not call it a color. This much is straightforward and corresponds to the verse 30, in which the whole is present in each part and each part is present in the whole. The harder thing is to understand how each shade is present in all the other shades. The short answer is that each shade is infinite, so we can never fully define that shade. So we define each shade by saying that it is not other shades. For example, we can try to define yellow by listing out its components, such as chrome, beige, golden, mustard, corn, lemon, and so on. Factually, yellow is an infinite set, so we can never complete this list. So how are we going to define yellow? The answer is by exclusion rather than inclusion. We have to say that yellow does not include red, green, blue, purple, orange, pink, etc. The more exclusions we add to yellow, the more precise is our definition of yellow. Fewer exclusions make our definition of yellow imprecise. Now, since definition of yellow requires the use of numerous excluded colors, in one sense, those shades are excluded, but in another sense, the excluded colors are required to define yellow, so they are parts of the definition of yellow. This corresponds to verse 29, in which I am in everything and everything is in me. Yellow is inside and outside red, and red is inside and outside yellow. All these principles require the use of semantics or concepts. If we try to analogize based on objects, we can never understand these verses. Verse 29 and 30 are also the summary of Bheda-Bhed philosophy, which can be summed up in four statements. Everything is inside Krishna, Krishna is inside everything. Everything is inside everything else, and everything is outside everything else. The last two statements can be derived from the first two statements, so we can also limit this to two statements, namely, everything is inside Krishna and Krishna is inside everything. For example, if Krishna is the whole and he is in me, then everything that is part of Krishna is also in me. Likewise, if Krishna is the whole and he is outside me, then everything that is part of Krishna is outside me. The parts of Krishna also include me, so I am at once inside myself and outside myself. Since I am inside myself, therefore I fully control my self-definition. But since I am outside myself and part of Krishna, therefore Krishna controls my self-definition. In one sense, I can define who I am, but if I define myself independently of Krishna, then my self-definition will conflict Krishna's definition of me, and then conflict everyone else's definition of me. And that will put me into conflict with everyone else. Then I will not be a part of anyone else, and nobody will be a part of me. So verse 29 depends on verse 30 because I am part of everyone and everyone is part of me. If and only if Krishna is part of everything and everything is part of Krishna. In this way, verse 30 is the cosmic version of Bhedabhed and verse 29 is the individual version of Bhedabhed. The individual version is stated before the cosmic version here. When we can see all things in me and myself in everything, then my happiness and distress are everyone's happiness and distress, and their happiness and distress are mine. Now there are infinite individuals, and yet they are one individual, because each one's happiness is the other one's happiness, and each one's distress is the distress of everyone else. This is called Paradukha Dukhi and Parasukha Sukhi, which means the perfected soul is happy by others' happiness and unhappy by their distress. He doesn't merge with other individuals, and yet he feels what they feel. Now, if this is the perfect state, then what is imperfection? The answer is that I am separate from you, God is separate from me, and the world is separate from both me and God. This ideology of separateness is monotheism, which separates souls from each other, all souls from God, God from the world, and souls from the world. Creation begins with separation. Then there are contracts between these separate things which are called laws. The contracts between soul and God are called religious laws. The contract between souls themselves are called social laws. And the contracts between soul and the world are called natural laws. Therefore, laws arise after separation of God, soul, and world. Because I cannot feel anyone else's suffering or happiness, so we must have a mutually binding contract on the exchange of happiness and distress, and this contract is called a law. But there is no contract required when I feel your happiness and distress, and vice versa, because your happiness and distress are mine, and vice versa. So when we talk about everything inside and outside everything else, immediately all the laws disappear. No more contracts. And so monotheisms are the embodiment of the material condition, the anti-yogi condition of life, which I have described many times as selfishness, individualism, and separateness. The spiritual condition is unity in diversity, and the material condition is contracts between individualists. It doesn't matter if both have soul, God, and world in them, because in the spiritual condition, there are both inside and outside, and in the material condition, they are only outside. This mutual exclusion of everything from everything else is embodied in Aristotelian logic as the law of non-contradiction and the law of excluded middle. The law of non-contradiction says that I cannot be myself and you. Your pain is your pain, not mine. The law of excluded middle says that I am either in pain or in pleasure, not both. So when I seek my pleasure, I don't care about your pain because it is not my pain. Accordingly, God can subject us to infinite pain if that gives him infinite pleasure. This is how God becomes sadistic. And when someone follows this God, he also becomes sadistic. And that is the end of happiness. Thus, we can logically prove how suffering follows from monotheistic theology and happiness follows from Vedic theology. Just because both have theology doesn't mean they are the same. Rather, monotheism leads to a sadistic God and Vedas lead to a loving God. This love is not an add-on to God or soul. It is entailed by the Bheda-Bhed philosophy, namely that everything is a part of everything else, so loving others is loving oneself. This Bheda-Bhed philosophy cannot be understood if we use physical or object analogies. This is why the word achintya or inconceivable was prefixed to Bheda-Bhed. But this philosophy is perfectly understood if we use conceptual or semantic analogies. So achintya is not necessary. Thus the same thing is conceivable and inconceivable. If we use physical analogies, it is inconceivable. But if we use semantic analogies, it is conceivable. This transition from inconceivable to conceivable makes Bhagavad-Gita a science. It is not modern science based on monotheistic separation and object-based thinking. It is Vedic science based on non-separateness and semantic thinking. And so there is no bridge between Vedic and modern science due to physical versus semantic difference. But semantic thinking is perfect science, whereas physical thinking is a delusion created by the soul to separate itself from God, nature, and other souls, and then exploit and be exploited. Vedic philosophy is not easy to understand, but it is even harder to practice it. The moment Krishna talks about everyone's happiness and suffering being everyone else's happiness and suffering as the state of perfection and life, Arjun says that this is impractical and undoable for me. He also says that the mind is very restless, turbulent, obstinate, and strong, and it is harder to control it than the wind. We can easily understand the difficulty in feeling another person's happiness and suffering because everyone has become selfish, so they feel nobody's happiness or suffering. Each person thinks they are separate from others, so they cannot empathize with others. But even before we reach this stage, we have to be able to fix our mind on one eternal self-identity. If we know that the self-identity is being a part of Krishna and Krishna being present in everyone, then empathy comes automatically and naturally. So the difficulty is even in fixing the mind on self-identity. Arjun cites four problems in controlling the mind. He says, Chanchalam hi manaha Krishna pramathi balavadranam. The word chanchalam means restless. Why is the mind restless? We noted two causes, namely guna and karma. My guna push me toward desire for pleasure, and the circumstances restrict that pleasure or entice with offers of pleasure. And so the mind is attracted and repelled by circumstances just as it is attracted by pleasure and repelled by suffering. The word pramathi means rapist. Even if some pleasure is forbidden, the mind wants to take it just like a rapist wants to enjoy a forbidden pleasure. The word balavat means by force. When someone wants to enjoy a forbidden pleasure, we might give them a moral argument to control the mind. But the person rejects the moral argument. He thinks that might makes it right and uses force to enjoy the forbidden. Finally, the word dhradam means resolute. Even if we retaliate against this force, the person remains resolute. He takes the beating, retreats for some time, only to return with even greater force. And so, this is the progression. First, there are strong desires. Second, these desires cannot be stopped by moral constraints. Third, a person uses force to get what he wants. Fourth, even if there is forceful retaliation, the person doesn't change his ways. In response to this argument from Arjun, Krishna accepts all these difficulties, but says that it is still possible to control the mind through practice and detachment. In this, detachment is yama and practice is niyama. Yama means stop doing bad things, and niyama means do good things regularly. Dissociate yourself from bad activities and associate yourself with good activities. The combination of these two is the path. Then Krishna says that someone doesn't follow this twin path cannot control his mind. But one who takes to this twin path, success is assured. These days, most people do not like to give up the bad activities, beliefs, and attitudes, even if they accept some good activities, beliefs, and attitudes. If they accept the Vedic path, they don't like to abandon their previous path. Even if they get good association, they don't like to give up bad association. Even if they are given the truth, they don't want to abandon the lie. As we discussed earlier, this is called elephant's bath. An elephant goes into river to take bath and then comes out and pours sand on its body. So nearly everyone taking to the spiritual path right now is doing elephant's bath. That means even if they do some good things, they cannot give up the bad things. They like to ride two horses at once. The result is that there is no yama and the niyama is weak at best. But without yama and with weak niyama, everyone thinks that they will make great progress. They don't realize that the mind is restless, immoral, forceful, and resolute, and it cannot be conquered unless the twin process of detachment and practice is applied. If we just do practice but don't voluntarily pursue detachment, the entire process becomes elephant's bathing. It is said that an advanced transcendentalist becomes fearless. It is partly true. The transcendentalist doesn't fear others, but he fears himself. I can make a mistake, I can fall prey to lust, I can be distracted from the path of perfection, and I can make a bad choice. Since choice is eternal, therefore bad choices are always possible. A transcendentalist doesn't make bad choices because he never stops fearing himself, namely, his ability to make mistakes. It is said that pride comes before a fall. Those who become cocky are sure to fall. It is not a question of if, but only a question of when. Therefore, progress in the spiritual path means humility. It is not humility against immorality and deceit. It is a constant self reminder that I can fall prey to lust and materialism. And if I forget that I can fall, then I will surely fall. And so I have to always fear myself, my weakness, my capacity to make mistakes. Through this remembrance, I remain humble, aware, and steady. Thus, even after Krishna says that by practice and detachment one can attain perfection, Arjuna is not sure if he can do what Krishna is asking. Arjuna also doesn't say that he will not do what Krishna is asking, as he had said earlier by citing the restless nature of the mind. Now that Krishna has clarified that the mind can be controlled, Arjuna has agreed to the practice. But he asks, what if I cannot finish the entire process? What if I start enthusiastically but fall prey to lust and materialism? What happens to those who fail to achieve spiritual perfection within this one life? I have never heard anyone ask this question. Nobody wants to ponder the possibility of failure. They like to think that if they begin, they will succeed. This is not true in any sphere of life. As the saying goes, there is many a slip between cup and lip. While most people may not inquire about failure, Arjun does. He asks what happens if he slips. Will all his efforts be wasted? Arjun also makes the question poignant by saying that if he failed to attain spiritual perfection, he would be nowhere. He would have sacrificed material pleasures and he would not have attained spiritual perfection. Even as failure is rarely discussed, it remains a key anxiety in everyone. If we examine monotheisms, we find that they address this anxiety through the doctrine of heaven on earth. Normally, for most people, there are two realms, the earthly realm of material enjoyment, and then to go to heaven, one has to make sacrifices. Now, if someone doesn't reach heaven, he has lost the earthly pleasures too. This is why monotheisms from the inception talk about a heaven on earth, which means material prosperity. To bring that heaven, one has to wage war, but that is all good because war brings prosperity right now, and there is heaven in the distant future. So, this duality of material and spiritual doesn't exist in monotheistic religions. The material is spiritual, and the spiritual is material. Monotheistic earthly wars are holy wars. With this dissolution of matter spirit difference, the anxiety over spiritual matters fades away because we don't have to choose between material and spiritual as they have now become one. Now, someone can wholeheartedly pursue materialism and yet call himself the most spiritual person. Heaven on earth dissolves Arjun's question. To give a clear example, the material spiritual difference was abrogated by the Protestant Reformation, where it formulated the doctrine called sola fide, which means by faith alone and not by actions. Earlier, Christians were required to do some charity, pay sin penalties, and practice other kinds of piety. But after the Protestant Reformation, a Christian is required to only have faith in the Savior. Piety has nothing to do with going to heaven. So now the question arises, how do you prove that you have faith in the Savior? How do you know who is a true Christian believer? This problem also became endemic as Protestant formed many sects. So, who among these sects is the true believer? The answer was prosperity, power, influence, and pleasure. Whoever has the most power, wealth, fame, and enjoyment is the true believer because their prosperity is given by God as the mark of them being the true believers. Now you just pursue power, wealth, fame, and pleasure, and material acquisitions define your holiness, spirituality, and godliness. You just try to make your earthly life a heavenly life, and if you succeed, you know that God favors you, so you are the true believer. The poor people, the downtrodden in society, those who could not get as much wealth, power, influence, and pleasure, are not just materially weak, but spiritually cursed. The Bible says that it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Protestants made richness the mark of entry into God's kingdom. So, this is the destiny of all anxious religions. Since they are unsure of success, they fear failure. But they address that fear by dissolving the spiritual material difference. Now, a person is free to pursue material pleasures because he has no anxiety about afterlife. He is assured a place in heaven simply by worldly prosperity. Thus, the most materialistic societies call themselves the most religious. There is no question of yama and niyama. There is no need for detachment and practice. There is no requirement to control the mind. There is no question of seeing everything in God and God in everything. When such societies undergo material decline, they panic because for them both material and spiritual fail at once and they cannot imagine the future. The real answer to spiritual anxieties is rebirth. Krishna says that one who follows the spiritual path is never destroyed. He might face some calamities due to his own past deeds, and he deals with them using detachment. He understands that he is not this body because the same soul is born in many bodies over and over. So the troubles of the body are not the troubles of the soul. That even if he died, the good deeds of this life will benefit him in the future. The anxiety is about whether I am doing good deeds right now, not about what will happen in the future. The anxiety about the future exists only in someone who does bad deeds at present. Even if someone is unable to complete the journey of spiritual perfection in this life, he gets another life to complete it. Such a person doesn't even lose the progress he has made in the previous life. He continues from where he had stopped because the body is simply another dress for the reborn soul. Krishna further says that even if someone dies after making some progress, he goes to the heavenly planets, enjoys for a long time, and is then reborn in a pious family or a wealthy family. But if he dies after a lot of progress, then he is reborn in a family of transcendentalists who are already great in wisdom, and from childhood he receives spiritual impetus to revive his prior state. Thus, those who make some progress enjoy heavenly life and return to material prosperity. But those who make a lot of progress are born in a family of yogis. Krishna says that this latter kind of birth is extremely rare. That means it is easier to be born in a billionaire family than to be born to genuine yogis. Little progress gives material prosperity, but great progress gives a spiritual family. Thus, in Vedic texts, it is said that even demigods crave for birth in Bharat because the people are very pious. Some years ago, a Pew research on religious beliefs in India was done, and they found that even Muslims in India believe in karma. Of course, the situation after a 1,000-year colonization is exceptionally degraded, and acceptance of rebirth has been declining, and with that, sinfulness is very high. But still, there are many more pious people in India today than anywhere else in the world. So even today, the demigods would prefer to be born in Bharat than anywhere else in the world. Anyone who reads the Bhagavad-Gita can clearly see the priorities. While ascent to heaven is not rejected, it is a mark of failure in the yogic path. Even if a person is born with a silver spoon in their mouth, it is a privilege only if they continue on the yogic path. The birth to spiritually inclined parents is the best, but it still indicates that the person failed to attain perfection in the past life. There is only one place in the world where hundreds of millions of people still believe in karma, rebirth, and yoga. So, given a choice of place, there is no better place to be born than Bharat. If someone doesn't utilize this opportunity to progress in yoga, they are foolish enough to not care for their own future. Of course, in this age called Kali Yuga, foolishness is the norm and not the exception. There are many people at present who have some vague ideas about yoga but are completely ignorant of the hierarchy of spiritual progress. They think that whatever they are doing is perfect. Many do asana and pranayam without yam and niyama. A rare few do yama, niyam, asana and pranayam and may talk about chakra and kundalini because they are principally interested in mystical powers. Some of them go beyond this and do pratyahara and dhyana, and they are called ascetics here. Even they have no idea about the Paramatma in the heart. Then there are many so called academic teachers who read translations of Vedic texts done by those who had zero practice or realization, so they think everything is mythology. They are called empiricists. Then there are innumerable people who do rituals without any understanding of mantra, yagna, or deity and expect material results. They are called fruitive workers. Literally, nobody knows that devotion to Krishna is the perfection of yoga. In fact, if we tell these people about Krishna Bhakti, they will accuse us of being sectarian and putting our God before their God. This is because they don't read anything, they don't have genuine curiosity, they don't ask anyone who might truly know, and they prefer to just keep doing whatever appeals to them rather than break the illusion by inquiry. But in these verses, Krishna states that a yogi, which means one who has understood how everything is within Krishna and Krishna is within everything, is superior to those who do rituals, those who pontificate on Vedic texts without any genuine understanding, and even those who might follow the Ashtanga Yoga system of Yama, Niyam, and so on. Then Krishna says that even superior to these yogis is one who is devoted to me. Yoginam api sarvesham madgaten antaratmana shraddhavan bhajate yomam same yukta tamomataha. Of all the yogis, one who always sees me within himself, who is always devoted to me, he is the best engaged. Yuktatama, that means the best engaged or the highest yogi. We don't get this kind of comparative analysis in any other Vedic text. Normally, each text teaches one or two things because that is their focus area. Then, if someone reads many books, he might come to know many topics. But that also leads to the question, are these many different paths and ideas, and every path is simply one's choice? Krishna answers this question by stating that the ritualists, philosophers, and ascetics are inferior to my devotees. There are four main types of yoga paths in the Vedic texts called Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. But the yogi that Krishna is talking about here is all four of them at once. He has perfect knowledge of reality, so he is a Jnana Yogi. He is always aware of Krishna's presence in his heart, so he is a Dhyana Yogi. He does all his work without desire for material profit, so he is a Karma Yogi. And he is always working for Krishna's pleasure, so he is a Bhakti Yogi. The perfection of yoga or the hierarchy of yoga is about the progress from doing one yoga path to doing two to three to four and ultimately all of them at once. And so in Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna describes each yoga path individually and then the perfection of all yoga paths, which is all the paths at once. Of course, Krishna is very humble. So after saying that my devotee is the greatest yogi, he humbly says, "This is just my opinion." Krishna doesn't force anyone to do only what he says. He puts forth the descriptions of the four types of yoga and then describes the hierarchy and perfection of yoga and then says, "Of course, this is just my opinion." Normally, we see that when a person achieves some success, he becomes very arrogant. Conversely, those who have achieved nothing but are at least aware of their lowly status remain very humble. But Krishna is simultaneously the greatest and the humblest. Normally, in most religions, we see that God sends someone to hell if they don't blindly follow their commands. But Krishna doesn't do that. That doesn't mean he is ignorant. He knows that he is the whole truth, that everything is his part, that the parts exist within the whole and the whole exists within each part. And yet, love cannot be forced. It has to be voluntary. So, after describing everything, he says, "This is my opinion. If you like it, you can take it. But if you have another opinion, you can follow that." Even as everyone can have an opinion, all opinions are not the same. People in recent times got tired of being forced to follow religious commands, so they claim that all opinions are personal beliefs. Anyone can have any belief, and the majority belief wins. The Vedic tradition avoids all these extremes. There is no force, and yet all opinions are not the same. The majority is not guaranteed to be correct unless it is properly educated. There is no value in the opinions of the vast numbers of ignorant masses. Krishna's opinion is the best opinion because he knows everything. But because he is so humble, he says, "It is just my opinion." This humility is also nonchalance. That means if we are not interested in Krishna, even Krishna is not bothered. He is not dying to be worshipped. Krishna is not a jealous God who will condemn anyone to hell if they worship another God or follow another religion or practice another yoga or believe in any other philosophy. Of course, everyone will get the results of their good or bad actions, but Krishna doesn't care if we don't care. Krishna's compassion is that he tells us the truth, but he has no expectation that we follow the truth. He is prepared to walk out of the door if we are not interested in listening to him. His bags are already packed and he is ready to leave. So we have to grab his hand and ask him not to leave. We can restrain Krishna by our love and devotion. If we sincerely say, "I have nobody other than you," then he stays. In other religions, God forces people to obey, but in Krishna Bhakti, by our love and devotion, we compel Krishna to stay.